All right, we've got a very busy 49ers morning. As I said yesterday, it was only a rough draft of the 53-man roster, the initial 53. Now that rough draft is being completed. The waiver wire has been processed, and I'm afraid to inform 49ers fans that there's some bad news. And I think that we saw this bad news coming. I think when I asked Kyle Shanahan before all this happened about Jarrett Kingston, and Kyle Shanahan seemed a little nervous. He didn't want to answer the question. They were afraid that Jarrett Kingston, the rookie sixth-round pick, would get claimed if they waived him. And they did waive Jarrett Kingston, and I'll explain some of the strategy. I'll explain perhaps the philosophical mistake that the 49ers are making, but they waived him, and he got claimed very first in the order by the Carolina Panthers. So that, to me, because the Panthers had the worst record last year, they had the first right to claim players. That suggests that other teams behind the Panthers might have also put in waiver claims for Jarrett Kingston, which means that there was little to no chance that he was going to make it back to the 49ers. Anyway, they lose a promising, athletic young lineman. Again, I will explain why here in a little bit, so bear with me. I just want to go through all the news first before we delve into the more detailed strategy talk. Cody Schrader, the running back, has been claimed by the Rams, so that ups the ante of the rivalry there, right? Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan. Cody Schrader getting claimed. That's just as big as the NFC Championship game and all those divisional round matchups, two more of which are coming this year. I'm just kidding about that part. But still, Cody Schrader will be taking handoffs from Jimmy Garoppolo, at least in practice for the Rams. And Samuel Womack III, the cornerback, claimed by the Indianapolis Colts. Those are the three players that the 49ers are not able to bring back to their practice squad because they had to go through waivers. And as they went through waivers, other teams put claims on them. The 49ers did not receive any players off of waivers because they were second to last in the claim order since they were the Super Bowl runner-ups last year. So you typically, with a really loaded roster, you're only going to be putting in claims on guys who probably are going to be desired by other teams. And that indeed was the case. The 49ers did not add through the waiver process, but they've made a couple other moves. First off, this one was expected. This is exactly what I told you guys last year or yesterday. Could have told you last year too, because the 49ers make moves like this every year. These are actually common around the NFL. But, everybody was freaking out about the two tight end setup that the 49ers had leaving the first cut down day yesterday. Well, not to worry. Eric Saubert is indeed back. That was a procedural move for the 49ers. He's going to be tight end 2 for San Francisco. So as we speak right now, they've got 3 tight ends on the 53, and we're waiting to see what happens with Logan Thomas. I think they're almost certainly going to keep Logan Thomas in the building. I don't know if it's going to be practice squad or 53-man roster. So why don't we wait for that? And there is news from Matt Barrows that they're going to be re-signing Ben Barch as well, although it's not fully clear if the offensive lineman Ben Barch is going to go to the practice squad or the 53-man roster. I do know that there are 2 53-man spots that will be opening up because, as I explained yesterday, they carried 2 injured players intentionally, John Feliciano and Ambry Thomas. Both of those guys are expected to be placed on injured reserve today. That allows them to return this season if the 49ers do need them. So in the case of Eric Saubert, one of the spots that either Feliciano or Thomas will vacate, that was designated for Eric Saubert to re-sign with the team. That was all orchestrated over the past 24 hours. And if Ben Barch is re-signing to the active roster, to the 53-man roster, that means that the other spot went to Ben Barch. And now I'm moving over to the practice squad signings that the 49ers are making. They're building their practice squad. So here's what I have for you on the practice squad front. Tanner Mordecai, the quarterback, he is back in the building. So the 49ers got exactly what they wanted in the QB room. They carry 3 on the 53, and they keep Mordecai around on the practice squad. So in effect, they are stockpiling at the quarterback position. Yesterday, we heard from Aaron Wilson that they're planning to re-sign the receiver Tay Martin back to their practice squad. Matt Barrows just reported that Evan Anderson, the defensive tackle out of Florida Atlantic, the biggest player on this 49ers roster, will be re-signing to the practice squad. that we could see coming here for months now. They gave Evan Anderson a $280,000 guarantee as an undrafted free agent, which essentially equated to a practice squad salary. There's going to be offset language for that, even though he was waived. So the plan all along has been to have Evan Anderson develop on the practice squad. As a 3 technique, a guy that can work and command double teams against the run. They have re-signed Chase Lucas to the practice squad. That's an efficient re-signing. Chase Lucas is a good gunner. He was a gunner for the Detroit Lions. So he's going to give them nickelback depth. And also, remember, you can elevate guys from the practice squad up to twice. I think Chase Lucas is a candidate to be elevated early because of his ability to deliver as a gunner. So you always like to see efficient usage of those 16 practice squad spots, especially the veteran slots, and that's where Chase Lucas falls in. They are also re-signing the veteran safety, also formerly of the Lions, Tracy Walker III, to the practice squad. And the news there is that Walker actually expects to be elevated early in the season, and that makes total sense because Talanoa Hufanga is off of PUP, but has not yet practiced, and we're less than 2 weeks away from the start of the regular season. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect Talanoa Hufanga to be ready to go 100% by week 1. Maybe he'll be active, but I don't think he'll be 100% ready to start. So what the 49ers are doing is they're bridging the gap with the practice squad, with the safety, Tracy Walker III, to give them safety depth. Jair Brown and George Odom probably start for the team, but Walker is waiting in the wings. And then if you're not feeling comfortable yet with Talanoa Hufanga, he can be inactive for week 1. But what activating him from PUP did is it allows him to come back before week 5. Otherwise, he'd be ineligible to return in weeks 1 through 4, and the 49ers didn't want that. It looks like their timetable for Hufanga to be back and starting and fully active is probably around week 3, I would guess, because you get 2 practice squad call-ups for Tracy Walker. If Hufanga is ready sooner than that, that's great. But it looks like this is an efficient use of roster space for the 49ers. Tom Pelissero just added another practice squad signing for the 49ers. That is the defensive end, Jonathan Garvin. We'll put Jonathan Garvin in here at one of the defensive end spots. He was with the 49ers this training camp. It looked like he had some fresh legs during training camp. War number 78 actually was impressive for San Francisco. So Garvin joins the practice squad. And also we got more news coming. It looks like Mason Pline also to the practice squad. Okay, so there's Mason Pline. It's from our friend Larry Kruger. Larry Kruger reporting that Mason Pline is going to be with the 49ers in the practice squad. Credit to him. So Mordecai, Tay Martin, Mason Pline, Evan Anderson, Jonathan Garvin, Chase Lucas, and Tracy Walker III are the 49ers who are reportedly re-signing with the practice squad. 7 out of 16 spots taken for the 49ers on that unit. All right, so now let's talk about roster maneuverings. The Jarrett Kingston situation. This is one that's going to get a lot of scrutiny. I talked a lot about Jarrett Kingston. I thought that he had a really good preseason, only gave up 2 pressures over 84 snaps. He's one of the most athletic offensive line prospects in this recent draft. The 49ers obviously went for the short shuttle in the recent draft, and in the short shuttle, Jarrett Kingston ranked 5th out of all O-line prospects at the 2024 NFL Combine. Dominic Pooney, who's going to be starting for the 49ers at right guard, ranked 3rd. I think we saw a lot of the skill set from Jarrett Kingston translate into the success in the preseason, and a lot of folks are wondering, well, the 49ers are trying to improve their pass protection. They want to build something long-term with this offensive line. Why didn't they not make it a priority to keep Jarrett Kingston? First off, if I was the GM of the 49ers, I would have kept Jarrett Kingston. We could put that out there very clearly. But I'm here just to analyze the 49ers strategy and to explain that I think it's a philosophical question for them. But at first, it starts with the decision that they actually had to make in the offensive line room before we can zoom out and look at the decision that they had to make roster-wide, on a roster-wide level. But anyway, in the O-line room, and I'm going to zoom in on it right here, John Feliciano is going to go to IR. So they obviously carried Feliciano, but it looks like they're re-signing Ben Barch to the team. So you can essentially say, just, for argument's sake, I'm going to erase John Feliciano's name right now from this mix. You can essentially say that they carried 8 healthy offensive linemen because Banks should be healthy by week 1. And that's Jalen Moore, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Dominic Pooney, Colton McKivitz, Nick Zakel, Spencer Burford, or Ben Barch. If they're confident that Trent Williams will re-sign before week 1 and be ready to go for week 1, then that's essentially 9 offensive linemen, but he's holding out right now. He's on the did not report list, so he doesn't count against that group. The most they've ever carried is 9 offensive linemen. The 49ers do not believe that carrying more than 9, most teams don't believe in carrying more than 9 offensive linemen. They like versatility out of their group of 9, and then they cater to other parts of their roster. So I do think that the 49ers were saying, okay, we'll carry 8 or 9, including Trent Williams, plus Kingston, if he clears waivers, will come from the practice squad, so we can continue to develop him. So it was a question between a more ready-made player and a developmental player on the offensive line. So I think it was essentially a question between Nick Zakel and Jarrett Kingston. The problem for San Francisco is because John Feliciano is going to go to injured reserve. He was the other guy that can play center in this group. Nick Zakel is the backup center for Jake Brendel and might be the only credible backup center for Jake Brendel. And Jake Brendel's already dealing with knee tendinitis. So the 49ers felt that if they picked Jarrett Kingston, this is my theory, if they picked Jarrett Kingston over Nick Zakel, that Zakel would get scooped up somewhere else and see some more seasoned offensive linemen, and that they would not have a backup center in that situation. And that would be tremendously shaky ground because Jake Brendel is already missing every 5th practice with knee tendinitis. That's a situation that he's had to manage. So I'm looking at this as a decision between Kingston and Nick Zakel for the 49ers that they made. Then you could argue, well, why didn't they just carry more offensive linemen? Why didn't they, just take away a player at a different position? And when I look up and down through the roster, the most sense seems to be made at linebacker. Even though they are missing Dre Greenlaw, they were able to carry Tatum Bethune. Obviously, you don't want to cut him, but they did carry Curtis Robinson and Demetrius Flanagan-Foles. We don't know how serious the D. Winters injury is, so maybe that had something to do with it. But, why not cut somebody like Demetrius Flanagan-Foles, try to bring him back if nobody else picks him up, and use the extra spot to carry somebody like Jarrett Kingston or somebody like Sam O. Although I think that defensive ends, especially guys that register sacks in the preseason, they're likely to get scooped up by somebody else. And obviously the 49ers are thin at defensive end. So some of the injuries you see here to Greenlaw, to Winters, to Floyd, to Gross Matos had made the 49ers a little thinner at these 2 positions at linebacker and defensive end. So they probably felt like they had to carry the last guy on the roster there, and that constrained them in as far as taking Jarrett Kingston. So they had to cut Jarrett Kingston instead. He was exposed to waivers, and that was that. To me, it does, though, come down to a philosophical question, and ultimately everything comes with opportunity cost. And it's, if you put a certain emphasis on wanting to keep this young promising offensive lineman with great athleticism scores and a good preseason under his belt, if you put a certain level of emphasis on that, you are going to make a decision in another position to keep that lineman and you're going to be okay with the opportunity cost elsewhere. The 49ers, we see where their limit at that opportunity cost is. And it was with Jarrett Kingston. They were not willing to thin out the linebacker position, and they were not willing to thin out the back end of the defensive line, which had already been thinned out a lot by injuries to carry Jarrett Kingston. They also were not willing to thin out the end of the receiving room. A lot of people are up in arms about the team taking Ronnie Bell, but let's be honest. Brandon Aiyuk is not practicing right now. Maybe that changes today. I've got a little bit of an update on that front for you in a few minutes, but they obviously aren't getting an efficient return right now for Brandon Aiyuk as his holdout continues. And Ricky Pearsall, I changed the coloring here on Ricky Pearsall. Maybe I should go back to the injured coloring because he is in a non-contact jersey, so they're working him back slowly. They feel that they needed extra insulation at wide receiver, which they probably do if Aiyuk and Pearsall remain question marks. So they're not willing to stretch themselves thin at wide receiver. They're not willing to stretch themselves thin at defensive end. They're not willing to stretch themselves thin at linebacker. Don't worry about Ambry Thomas at the cornerback position. That's just the roster maneuver. He's going to go to injured reserve. It wasn't between Ambry Thomas and Jarrett Kingston, but it was between Jarrett Kingston and Nick Zakelj, and I understand that decision just from the backup center standpoint. And then it was on a philosophical level a decision between Jarrett Kingston and back-end depth at these other positions where, you can make the case and you can make the explanation at each of those positions for why the 49ers did need the guy at the very back end of that position to run an effective roster. But you could also make the case for them skimping a bit at those positions to carry somebody like Jarrett Kingston. Ultimately, though, philosophically, we've never seen them put huge emphasis on the guard position, especially. They put more emphasis on tackle. They just haven't had the draft capital to go out and select a tackle that's good enough to be on their football team recently. And they put more emphasis on center. Center and tackle have been the two positions of emphasis for Kyle Shanahan. I think guard play has suffered because of that, but they feel they can scheme around it. And they feel that, the draft this year where they picked up a versatile offensive lineman like Dominic Pooney can really help that guard position coming out of the third round. So that's just how the 49ers have approached this. You can disagree with it. Again, personally, I probably would have shortchanged one of the other positions to keep a promising offensive lineman like Jarrett Kingston. I did sense that Kyle Shanahan was nervous about this the other day when I asked about Jarrett Kingston because he didn't want him to get poached. But if that's the modus operandi for the 49ers, they opened themselves up to that risk, and this is what happened. It's the second straight year that the 49ers have lost an offensive lineman through the waiver process after the cutdown. Last year was Ilm Manning. Now, let's be 100% clear here, but I know Ilm Manning had different measurables than Jarrett Kingston, so I don't want to put them in the same bucket, but we do have to compare them. Manning got picked up by the Cardinals, but he didn't stay with them. Manning is now with the Seattle Seahawks. He's bounced around a couple teams. He even returned to the 49ers building a little bit later last season. So it's not like these guys are automatically going to get picked up by another team and turn into all pros. There's always a chance that that's going to happen. And I think that the 49ers really, truly believe that Jarrett Kingston was a surefire all pro, that he was burgeoning into a star. I think they wouldn't have exposed him to waivers. But two things could be true at once. They could think that he's a promising player. They could also think that he's not quite ready to contribute right now. And they could also, three things can be true at once. They can also say, we don't feel comfortable on a championship caliber roster. We don't feel comfortable shortchanging another position just to fit this guy on. We have to roll the dice. We have to take the risk. We have to see if we can get him through to the practice squad. And obviously that did not work. But as the Ilm Manning situation shows us, you can lose a guy and he could probably still, be a journeyman in this league, at which case, you don't a year later really regret losing that guy. It was worth the trade-off for the 49ers in the Ilm Manning case to carry a player elsewhere. Now we'll see how the Jarrett Kingston situation ends up for San Francisco. We have more news here today. I know that people are getting tired of the Brandon Aiyuk updates. That's why I waited until a little bit later in the show to give this, but I think that it is worth monitoring. We're going to be heading down to Santa Clara a little bit later today. We're going to talk to Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. And this is what Mike Garafolo said today. So at this point, this is a quote from him. So at this point, they get into the practice schedule this week, and they're going to practice this afternoon. That happens at 3:00 this afternoon. Sort of the understanding was that at this point, he would practice. So Mike Garafolo was talking about on NFL Network this morning. He was saying, we'll see if Brandon Aiyuk is out on the practice field today, which obviously, set off alarm bells in my head because we're looking for any sign of change or progress on the Aiyuk front, especially tangible progress. Him being back out on the practice field would obviously be huge. It wouldn't necessarily mean that they're closer to a deal, but it would mean that they're closer to a resolution. And a potential resolution in the Brandon Aiyuk situation has always been for him to play on the fifth-year option. John Lynch said we were totally okay with that. He said that back at the NFL owners meetings. In fact, if the 49ers can get Brandon Aiyuk playing on the 50-year option, if they can get a motivated Brandon Aiyuk playing on the 50-year option, it probably would be the biggest win possible in this entire negotiation for San Francisco, because he's due $14 million this year. That would save cap space for the 49ers in the long run, and they obviously need cap space in the long run, and they'd get a receiver playing in a contract year. Now, I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. Right now, I'm just reacting to what Mike Garafolo, who's, I think, been great in this whole saga. I think he's reported this very accurately, very well. I'm just reporting what he said, and apparently there had been an understanding that if Aiyuk and the 49ers didn't reach a deal, that at some point he would return to practice. I think it's really important to zoom out and emphasize the actual situation here. And it is that Brandon Aiyuk is already under contract for 2024. He is trying to get a pay raise a year early from the 49ers. He's trying to get paid before his contract expires. Whenever you do that, there has to just naturally has to be some give, right? In a standard situation from the player. You have to be okay with taking slightly less favorable terms because you're not yet a free agent. You don't have the negotiating leverage that you would do if you're a free agent. It is part of the trade-off. You get that financial security earlier, but you get a little bit less of it because you took it earlier. However, if the sides are unable to agree on fair compensation, if they're unable to agree on a trade-off that both parties determine to be equitable, then you could just back away from the negotiating table and you could play out the contract year. I mean, that's how a non-toxic process should work in this situation. So Mike Garafolo implies that this was the understanding, that both sides would, at a certain point before the season, would see Brandon Aiyuk return to the practice field if a deal wasn't reached, so that this wouldn't turn into a negative impact on the 49ers and on Brandon Aiyuk during the course of the season. The question is, even if that was the plan at some point, is it still the plan now? And I guess we will find out today, because it is the 49ers' first practice after the roster cut down. And I'm telling you, it is a big problem for the 49ers that they've got a player taking up a roster spot and not practicing. Is that problem rectified? It became a much bigger potential issue with the roster constricted from 90 to 53 players yesterday. At 90 players, if one of the guys is an inefficient part of the roster, and that's Brandon Aiyuk with the hold in right now, fine. It's one of 90. But he's a much bigger percentage of the roster at one of 53 than he was at one of 90. They're much bigger opportunity costs right now for the 49ers, with Brandon Aiyuk being one of 53 instead of one of 90. So it's all something to keep in mind. Another 49er that's intending to sign with the practice squad is T.Y. McGill. We definitely expected that one. T.Y. McGill is a high floor defensive tackle for the practice squad that's been with the 49ers over the past 2 seasons. You want a veteran on there so that way you can call him up when need be. T.Y. has actually played in 11 games over the past 2 seasons. So we've added McGill to the list. You see Mordecai, Tay Martin, Mason Pline, Evan Anderson, T.Y. McGill, Jonathan Garvin, Chase Lucas, and Tracy Walker III. That is 8 practice squad spots taken. So half of the 49ers practice squad is now full. Yesterday, I went through the good, the bad, and the risky of what the 49ers were doing on roster cutdown day. And I put the risky was waiving Kingston and Nugent. Yeah, well, it turns out that waiving Kingston was definitely a risk that didn't turn out the way the 49ers would have preferred for it to turn out. We'll see if they're able to re-sign Drake Nugent, the center, to their practice squad. Because as you can see right now, unless Ben Barch re-signed to the practice squad, which I think that the active roster is more likely for Ben Barch. By the way, we still have Feliciano on IR. That move hasn't officially been made. We still have him on the 53 with a IR prediction. I'm sure that's going to happen at some point but unless that Ben Barch is on the practice squad, which I don't think he is, they don't have any practice squad bodies yet here on the offensive line. So I would imagine with the final 8 spots for this practice squad, the 49ers will start filling out this part of their roster, as it's still a little bare bones in this section. So I talked about the risky yesterday. I talked about the bad, Elijah Mitchell's injury situation. And I talked about some of the good. How about the emergence of Tatum Bethune and Darrell Luter Jr.? It was a fun day yesterday. We covered a lot of ground, but now we've got to talk about what the 49ers are doing on day 2 of building this roster. Saubert back, Ben Barch back, practice squatters coming in. Somebody like Jarrett Kingston, though, is not going to be part of that. And I just explained the whole thought process and the whole decision-making process there. If you have any more questions about that, maybe now is a good time to fire off good, intelligent questions, because I'm going to open up a 49ers Q&A. Mike is keeping track of all the transactions. I'm talking about them. Charlie comments right now. He wants the 49ers to get Drake Nugent back. And I think that would be a key win for the 49ers. Again, they have valued centers and tackles over guards in the past. So, I mean, I think Nugent, he gave up only 1 pressure over 57 snaps. I think they really like his pedigree. Stanford guy originally, just like John Lynch. Then he went to Michigan, and he was an all first team Big Ten center on the 15-0 national championship Michigan team under Jim Harbaugh. Did I talk about Hufanga already? Yes, I did. The 49ers re-signed Tracy Walker III to the practice squad at safety. He's a veteran, counts against one of those 6 veteran slots, and he has re-signed to the practice squad with the intention of being called up early in the season, presumably to fill in for Talanoa Hufanga, or at least give Talanoa Hufanga some time to work back to 100%. So their window for Hufanga is somewhere between weeks 1 and 4, which is why they activated him from PUP. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be full go less than 2 weeks from now, week 1 against the Jets. The Lions are not ahead of the 49ers. The Lions actually have to beat the 49ers to be ahead of the 49ers. You don't go out and win an NFC championship game against an opponent and dominate them in the second half the way the 49ers dominated Detroit, and then have people credibly turn around and say that the team that you beat is ahead of you. You leapfrog teams on the football field. The 49ers are the kings of the NFC until somebody takes that throne from them. The Chiefs are the kings of the NFL until somebody like the 49ers takes that throne from them, just the way that things work. You don't win championships or leapfrog teams in the offseason. And I think the 49ers didn't have a bad offseason at all. You look at San Francisco's roster, what they needed to do this offseason was fill in the 53-man with quality rookie depth. Rookies are highlighted in green. There are a lot, and Ricky Pearsall's a rookie too, but right now I have him highlighted in pink due to the shoulder. But you got a lot of green that made the roster. So the 49ers did exactly what they needed to do this offseason as far as the short-term construction of the 53. They made the offensive line better. Now, obviously, you've got to get Trent Williams back in there, but they still have him under contract. They still have Brandon Aiyuk under contract. We'll wait for those situations to be resolved. But to me, it seems like they did exactly what they needed to do on the depth level by infusing this roster with playable rookies, new energy, but also cost-controlled energy. And it's impossible to say when the 49ers did what they were supposed to do this offseason in terms of the draft, in terms of that depth. It's impossible to say that some team that they beat in one of the biggest games of last season has somehow magically leapfrogged them. You want me to acknowledge Juice? All right, we'll acknowledge Kyle Juszczyk. I acknowledge Kyle Juszczyk a lot. He's one of the best unheralded weapons in the game. We saw Braden Willis get cut. And I think one of the reasons Braden Willis got cut is because he couldn't execute as the backup fullback. They couldn't get some of the blocks that the 49ers needed to lay down. It's really tough to get those blocks down. They entrust Kyle Juszczyk with some intense assignments against defensive linemen, and he goes out and he executes them at a super high level, play in and play out. So yes, I will acknowledge him. Michael is concerned about the depth for the 49ers offensive line. Well, again, this is not complete yet. I think every team has depth questions along the offensive line, by the way. There are more quality defensive linemen than offensive linemen in the league right now. That's just a general football truth at the moment. Trent Williams is not on this list right now because he's on this list. He's on the reserve did not report list. So, yes, you've got to figure out the Trent Williams situation. That makes things better. John Feliciano is going to go to IR. He's going to be a later season reinforcement. So then you're looking at guys like Barch. You're looking at Zakelj. You're looking at Burford. That's decent interior depth. My question is more at right tackle and the depth behind Colton McKivitz. What are the 49ers going to do about that? And obviously figuring out the Trent Williams situation. But I would not sit here and pass full judgment on this offensive line until this roster construction is fully complete. And that's going to include the practice squad, and there's still 8 spots left. So let the 49ers finish their maneuvering for today. The Steelers have announced Russell Wilson as their starter. That was not unexpected over Justin Fields. I am looking through some more questions here. What time is it? 10:45. Fun couple days. We've had a lot of firm 49ers news. It's been good to be able to step up and just analyze this stuff as they're adding to the practice squad. I'll be updating you all day. They've got 8 spots left to go to add to this practice squad. We can open this up and show you what it's all about for the 49ers. Now, keep in mind that on my roster sheet, I have the dividing line. I have now edited the roster sheet to have red on the right, gold on the left. Red is the practice squad side. They've added Mordecai, Martin, Pline, Evan Anderson, T.Y. McGill, Jonathan Garvin, Chase Lucas, and Tracy Walker III to the practice squad. Greenlaw is not on IR. He's on PUP. Just a little bit of a difference, but no firm date for that yet. He tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl, so I think you should be patient on that front. Where's Ilm Manning these days? I just talked about him. You must have joined late. That's fine. Good viewer for El Quadra. Ilm Manning is in Seattle these days. He's bounced around a few teams. So he was in the same boat as Jarrett Kingston is this year. And I think it essentially proves that you shouldn't freak out too much about an offensive lineman being waived. Again, if I was running the 49ers and this is just me and I'm not a GM and I don't pretend, that I should be a GM, there's a lot of presumptuous people on the internet behind anonymous accounts that think they should be general managers and they do a better job than the 49ers have built the most talented roster in football. But personally, if I was the GM and I'm not, I'm just here talking about it and I build rosters like this and I track it, I would put a little bit more priority on keeping somebody like Jarrett Kingston. That's why I asked Kyle Shanahan about it yesterday. But, I recognize that's not my job. My job is to talk about it. My job is to explain it. So I'm not going to sit here and, make these sweeping judgments about a play. It's a long shot for every player drafted lower in the NFL draft to make it. I'm not going to make these sweeping judgments that so-and-so player that the 49ers waived would have turned into a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I think the Il Manning situation illustrates that point, right? He's been with several teams. He hasn't really been able to stick anywhere yet for the long term, even though people were all up in arms when the 49ers waived him last year. I really like Jarrett Kingston. I think that athleticism profile is great. I think the 49ers should invest at least a tad more in terms of roster space in that interior line, even if the guy is a project, even if he is a prospect. But I also understand that they've got short-term needs to take care of, and you have to have a backup center. You absolutely have to have a backup center. Nick Zakelj is the only guy that can really do that for the 49ers right now with John Feliciano hurt. And I also understand that you're thin due to injuries at other positions. That's why Ronnie Bell made the team at receiver. It's why Sam O made the team at defensive end. It's why they carried all these linebackers, including Demetrius Flanagan-Foles and Curtis Robinson. And you don't want to skimp at those positions either if you're the 49ers. It's just not worth it for them. So I get the philosophy, and I think it's really, really important to grasp the big picture of strategy for San Francisco. If you're saying that I'm the Niners PR guy when I'm saying that I literally would have done something differently, you are not very smart. You need to develop better reading comprehension or better understanding of the English language. We could just put it that way. Justin says that Kyle and John have been great, but they need to bring someone into the front office to help them build this offensive line. So, I think like you're look at the offensive line right now. I don't know if it's like a matter of they don't know how to build an offensive line or a matter of prioritization in cases like the Kingston case. Jarrett Kingston, by all metrics, was an extremely athletic offensive lineman, just like Dominic Pooney, who's succeeded early. Now we got to see how he does in the regular season, but his preseason was really good. Jarrett Kingston is not on this team anymore. So it shows you that I think they other teams wanted him. The Panthers obviously were the team at first in the waiver process that scooped him up. It shows you that the 49ers had a very targeted strategy for what kind of interior lineman they wanted to get. They're able to keep Pooney on the team. They decided to waive Kingston. They were hoping he would come back to the practice squad. He didn't come back to the practice squad. I don't think that it's a lack of targeting offensive linemen who fit their scheme, and they're constantly tops in the run game, and they had the number one offense in the league last year. They've done a lot of good stuff there, but I do think that their prioritization is a little different than what a lot of fans would like to see it be. So they're prioritizing positions on the back end of the linebacker room, of the defensive line room, of the receiver room in this case, to ensure that the depth of the team stays robust ahead of project offensive linemen. Now it's fine if you want them to keep the project offensive lineman on the team, great. But that's just not their philosophy. So, I don't think that bringing someone else into the front office is going to change the philosophy of the bosses. That's the point. I think you bring somebody into the front office if you're struggling to identify appropriate talent. But they're not struggling to identify talent. They identified Pooney. They identified Kingston, somebody who, it seems was the rest of the league was ready to pounce on this offseason. We'll see what happens with Drake Nugent, but I believe they're going to be able to re-sign him to the practice squad. And they actually have brought in talented players up front. Again, look at Pooney. They did sign Trent Williams. They invested a lot in Trent Williams. So that was important to them. Now they've got to invest even more to Trent Williams. When they first elevated Jake Brendel to center, they got really good play. I think the knee tendonitis has slowed him down. And let's, just pump the brakes a little bit on somebody like Nick Zakelj. I think that he's developed behind the scenes for 2 years, and he might have his big chance to produce this season. think he's better at center than he is at guard. So they had to keep Nick Zakelj due to the fact that they don't have anybody that can play center behind Jake Brendel right now. So it's a lot more complicated than these. Oh, they need to bring somebody in to help. They need to do this. I mean, these guys know football. They're obviously setting their prioritization sliders. They're obviously taking into account some of the drawbacks. You could disagree with where exactly a prioritization level is, as I've said that I do. I think that I would add a little bit more prioritization to the keeping project offensive linemen, just so you can see how they would develop in your system. But, just because the prioritization level in the building is a little bit different than mine doesn't mean that they don't know what they're talking about. They've built the most powerful roster in football. They've seen a ton of success over the past 5 seasons. So I think like some respect of that is necessary. Looking through some more questions. I've got a few more minutes here. About 1,200 people. Awesome. Can owners do anything when players like Williams are holding out when they have multiple years left on the current contract? They could do absolutely nothing and see if the holdout continues, and then that player doesn't make money because you don't earn the money on your contract if you don't show up. So that's the nuclear option. But there's an understanding in these NFL contracts, these mega deals. The team has the contractual control, but once you hit the portion of the contract that doesn't have any guaranteed money, there's an understanding that if a player is delivering at the level that Trent Williams is at, that it's probably going to be renegotiated. Now, how much is Trent Williams asking for in the renegotiation? That's a whole other question. And if it's putting the 49ers into a very tough financial bind, that's why the negotiation might be difficult. To finish up here, I've created a salary cap report. I know that the full practice squad is not signed yet. I know the 49ers officially still have to make some moves to complete this initial roster. That being said, I went ahead and got ahead of this by making my salary cap sheet with the 53-man roster and with some practice squad prices already inserted. This is the most thorough sheet that you're going to find. And I estimate that the 49ers, after they finish some of these signings, will have about $17 million in 2024 salary cap space. Remember that unused salary cap space carries over from season to season. So it's not about the space this year. It's about the space in 2025 and 2026. I do think that they're in healthy financial condition if they can execute the Aiyuk and Williams deals to fit with their financial structure, which is why they're negotiating so hard in both of those situations. I will delve into the finances of this much more deeply as soon as this roster is fully complete, but I just wanted to give you a quick look at how everything is constructed. All right, everybody, hit that sub button. Thanks for watching. We will talk to you soon. It's going to be a busy day. It has just now begun.